Sarah Williams.
The online test of
Okay.
she doesn't.
Right. No, it doesn't look like she's made it from here either. I believe John Cook Woodman is unable to join us today. Debbie, do you have any? Sorry. Michael Dunk has given his apologies. We are Court. We are Court, right?
Three is Court.
Three is Court, right? Okay, we are Court. So, okay, moving on. If we can deal with the minutes, sorry, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? Not seeing any hands, so we'll move on to item 3 on there. There's the minutes of the previous meeting. Is it your wish I sign those as a true record? Thank you. Might I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposed, seconded, and voted on. All 4. Right. Public question time. I've not made aware of any. No, coming late. Okay. Right. And the Independent Investment Advisors report, a verbal update from yourself, Anton.
No, that is from Caroline. Now, I was expecting Caroline to either be online or in the room, and she appears to be neither. So,
shall we pause and come back to it?
If she appears, we can come back to it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll have to pass on that item for this meeting. Okay.
She's just emailed me to say she's not being allowed in.
Oh. Let her in, please. In the interim, we will move on. Time to wait. So, item 6 on our agenda: the review of the investment performances, pages 17 to 36 of your paperwork. And again, this is from your good self, Anton.
This is indeed me. And I shall also just note that I think I've just seen Councillor Mike Hewitt in the online.
Mike Hewitson?
Sorry, Mike Hewitson, indeed.
It's online. Okay, that's fine.
On the basis he's a member of the committee, I thought.
That's excellent. Welcome, Mike.
Morning, everyone.
Bear with me as I just get my papers to the right place.
Yeah.
As always with this paper, there's a lot in it. It's quite long. And I will concentrate on some key points, but then happy to take questions on any part of it at the end.
Indeed.
So if I talk directly to the parts on the combined fund, so that's section 16, starting on page 29.
Yep.
Returns for the quarter at 5.6% were very strong. We are very much in a sort of a 2 steps forward, 3 steps back sort of regime at the moment. It'll depend on where your month is, your quarter end is, because even month to month, we're seeing quite a lot of disparity. Returns since the 31st of March have not been good. So there is a lot of sort of uncertainty in markets. Some of that's because of the uncertainty around future direction of interest rates, both in America and Europe and UK, direction of inflation, which directly impacts that, direction of employment statistics, which impacts that. And then obviously there is considerable political uncertainty around at the moment, directly in the UK, as of Monday, I think it was, directly in France.
Yes.
And obviously the temperature is starting to build in the US ahead of their elections in November. So all of those things are not, I mean, markets like certainty. Don't we all?
Don't we all?
And they tend to go up most during periods of certainty and good economic growth. It's not rocket science in that sense. And yeah, that's not where we are at the moment. So returns for the quarter, 5.6%, very good. Return for the year of 13.1%, also quite strong. And you can see in the graph on 16.6 on page 31, as at the end of March, that's taken us just above the sort of the actuaries line of what we're targeting for this triennial valuation period. As I say, I suspect come the end of June, we're going to be back below that line. But we're not far away. I will also just point out in 16.8, I did do a bit of a rebalance in February and March, moving some money from equities where we are heavily overweight back towards fixed interest where we are heavily underweight. That's also a decision that I think we are nearer the end of this interest rate rising cycle and towards an interest rate dropping cycle when fixed interest will perform better.
Yes.
I'm not saying I've timed it perfectly, but it felt like a good opportunity just to make some modest corrections.
Well, at 16.8, I noticed that Neuberger Berman, which were underperforming slightly in the last, have come on a little stronger, but you have chosen to withdraw 5 million from that.
So that's
fund. Now, I actually think that's probably a very good move.
well.
However, I make the point that they have started to come back into the performance because we always get these peaks and troughs.
But with the private equity,
Yeah.
both Neuberger and Brunel, what happens is we commit to a fund.
Yes.
They draw down the money
Yes.
on their schedule, and then when they realise profits, they return them to us. So it's not, or that Neuberger Berman is sort of maturing and will fully mature over the next 5 years. So it's just throwing off cash. I'm not making an active decision to take it.
Okay, thank you for that. That helps with the process in what passes for a brain.
Yeah.
So
one thing I'd just like to, I didn't put it in the recommendations because I wrote these a few weeks ago and my brain hadn't thought about it. But one thing I'd just like to raise sort of under pooling is that currently Jason Vaughan is the what's referred to as the shareholder representative, which basically means he can sign off when we vote. It's his signature on the piece of paper I sent back. Obviously, he is leaving. By default, that would go to the new section 151. But I'm wondering, on the basis that they are explicitly an interim, whether it might be better to pass that responsibility either to Nicola, or if it makes no difference to you, to me, just to effectively give more continuity.
I think continuity is what we are aiming for because we too like stability. Now, my personal preference would be that it's yourself, but that's a personal preference.
It's in the committee's gift. As I
It's
say, it's literally who signs the form, because I always send the information to you all. I always request your thoughts, and I will continue to include the section 151 in that email.
Well, I think until the appointment of a new 151 that's likely to take on that role, as has Jason Vaughan, the current 151, I think in the interim, I'm going to suggest that we make Anton the arbiter of that. I'm going to propose that. Can I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Peter. Can I see that? Those in favour of that, please? Yeah, that's unanimous. So
thank you,
Anton, if you would like to continue to do that, we would be very pleased.
I will make that note and inform those that need to know.
Excellent, thank you. Now, the recommendations, I think it's just to note.
Just a note, unless there's questions.
Right, questions for Anton on item 6 on our agenda, ladies and gentlemen. Any questions for B?
Just a quick one here, Anton. How does the strength of sterling affect the marketplace?
So overall, if you look at the equity assets we own, the vast majority of those are outside the UK. And therefore, if sterling weakens, the value of those increase and vice versa. There is also a slightly weird thing with UK equities that because a significant portion of the companies that are quoted in the UK get their profits globally, there's often a situation where if sterling weakens, those profits in sterling terms increase. And so you tend to get a rally in the UK stock market when sterling weakens. It is possible for us to remove the currency risk, but in the long term, it tends not to add value. So it's not usually worth the effort. We did it for a period from 2008 to about 2015, I would say. And the net impact on the fund was pretty minimal.
Okay, cool.
I think I think you've got your speaker on, Anton. From my experience, with the change of government comes the strength of sterling, and we've seen this in the past. And then I think we ought to just look at it and have a plan B. In my opinion, it's the right thing to do. But just have a plan B, because I think it looks pretty likely that Labour will actually take the next government, and normally that strengthens the sterling. And if that happens, then I think we ought to sort of have some sort of plan in place to look at how potentially we can actually minimize our risks.
Yeah, I suppose the other thing to bear in mind is that it's unusual, not unheard of, but unusual for sterling to appreciate against all or move in the same direction against all currencies. And obviously the US dollar is by far the dominant exposure we have, but we also have considerable exposure to euros, Japanese yen, Australian dollars, etc., etc. And it would be unusual for there to be a monodirectional movement. I would also caution that I'm not convinced in the short term there is sufficient in the Labour manifesto that it would move sterling, and the most likely thing to change the relationship of sterling to other currencies is relative interest rates. So if the US starts dropping interest rates before the UK, then that would see the US dollar weaken against UK, all other things being equal, which is always a bit of a catch-all for I don't really know, because there's too many other things moving. So we will keep an eye on it, but I would caution against putting in action. As I say, what we would tend to find when we were doing it was that we might have a cash flow from the hedging of about £1 million a month on a £2 billion fund. And so even over a year, 18 months, in a big year, you might get a £5-6 million movement. And it doesn't move the dial enough to be worth the effort and the impact.
But I'm assuming that I'm sure it's safe for us to assume that this is reviewed on a regular basis and it's something that's on your radar. And if the situation changes, you would come back with a slightly different recommendation.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Do we have any other questions? No. Okay. So that's we agreed to note that report. Now, is Rachel online now?
It's not Rachel, it's
Shirley is online to do the admin paper.
Okay,
I saw Caroline had just arrived, so I wasn't sure if you wanted me next or Or the
Should we do
investment
Caroline
lady.
first?
so Caroline first, yeah. Caroline, if you'd be so kind. I'm not hearing. Caroline?
I can't see it.
Debbie?
she did pop in, didn't she? I thought.
I think she's clearly got some issues because I'm not seeing her in the moment. So
Right,
crack on, Shirley.
okay.
Back to me.
Shirley. Shirley, my apologies for messing you around.
No, that's fine, not a problem.
Good morning.
Hello, everybody. I'm here as Rachel is unable to attend today. So she has written the report that I will now go over for you. As you're aware, Peninsula Pensions uses a task management system to monitor performance against the occupational and personal pension schemes disclosure regulations. And Appendix 1 of this report provides information for the quarter, the 1st of January 24 to the 31st of March 24, as well as for the full year of the 23-24 financial year. The overall performance for both is showing at 91%. We've included a graph with this appendix to show the monthly trend of the percentage of high, medium and low priority cases that we are completing within the timescales since April 2022. We have also received in this quarter 41 compliments and 14 complaints. The details of the complaints are shown within the Appendix 1. Appendix 2 of the report highlights the longer term performance of the team for the Somerset Fund and is showing figures from the 1st of April 23 to the end of March 24. With the bottom chart showing the remaining tasks outstanding to be actioned, along with that awaiting further information from either the scheme member or the employer and are therefore on reply due cases. Appendix 3 of the report highlights the amount of work received over the previous 12-month rolling period and compared to the same period in the previous year. The chart is currently showing an increase in demand. And the report also provides updates on employer movements, as well as McLeod, which is moving along slower than we maybe would like, but we are in talks with our data providers, and part of the reasons for the slowness in that is because of regulatory requirements and guidance needed from the LGA and HMRC. We've also included the data scores for the pension regulator return, which is where we have individual data and how what we hold for people. So for the common data, that's certain things like your name and address, and the more personal information would maybe be sort of like your email, etc., to make it more personal to yourselves. We've also included the Devon Audit Partnership audit review on cybersecurity, and I'm pleased to confirm that this review has shown that we have now moved to reasonable assurance in all areas. And then I was just going to open to questions or report.
Okay, committee. Peter.
I was just wondering if we could throw a little more light on the McLeod situation, which seems to me similar statement to last time.
Okay, so with McLeod, the regulations came into force on the 1st of October 23. They didn't go through the final part of Parliament until the September, so that delayed certain information being able to be input via like the data providers. It's like a national issue that has occurred there. But what the team have been doing is for cases that move through and sort of like active members that are leaving, we're in a better position that we can actually do the business as usual and make sure that things are correct going forward. But for those cases that had already retired or become deferred cases or transfer out cases, pension sharing cases on divorce, all needed some additional work, and we have an 18-month window to do that work, and so that's sort of ongoing. We're still very much within that time frame, but some of the work that needs to be done, it looks like there would be a further like the 18-month, if you like, is being the administrators are being squeezed on because of the data improvements that are required, and we're getting information from the LGA on statements that we should provide members on sort of like to time with their annual benefit statements. So they're called remedial service statements, which will show what the benefits would be following McLeod regulations compared to what it currently is. So with the local government scheme, we will automatically do the best for the member when we have those calculations in place. And it is thought that although there's a lot of work involved, there isn't a lot of members that will benefit from the recalculations of the work with that regard. But what I can ask for Rachel to do is provide a fuller update at the next committee meeting to show where things are at that.
I would very much appreciate that, Chair. And in particular, I'm keen to know, are we going to need the full available time frame in order to close this matter out, or is there a possibility of closing it out earlier? It seems to me one of those things that you don't want to allow to drag on if it's possible to conclude the work we should do.
Yeah, and we have a team within the office that is specifically working on McLeod, and we've just appointed a further person to work on it. We get everything done within the time scale, but as you say, we don't want to be working up to the last minute. We would rather have a good cushion of time to do that. But I'll ask Rachel to provide a further report in is it September, the next meeting?
Yes, that would be appropriate. Thank you. I had the privilege of attending the pensions LGPS pensions conference this week in Cirencester, and the McLeod was a considered situation by the whole of the LGPS, and they're all aiming to make sure they get it right. And it is on everyone's radar. There was a whole section on McLeod. And it would be fair to say, I think Rod would agree, that it is on everybody's radar, and there are teams in every pension fund that are looking at this to ensure that we get it right. So a report in September would be fine. Anton, is there anything you'd like to pick up on? No? Okay. Paul, sorry, Paul.
Two questions, if I could. The first one is around performance, and looking at the graph on page 42, the performance for low priority areas has been lagging now for about 4 months. Could you just update us on the progress and plan to get that back on track, please?
So within that work, what we have done over the last few months is we've got some additional staff, and we have additional apprentices that have come in from sort of like April time they joined us. So we have been training them up on these lower priority work, so that we can sort of like make sure that there is definite improvements in that area. What we have also, some of the main areas they've been working on are frozen refunds, where you can see there's cases is showing only at a 56% rate. With those cases, they can click in and be affected by the amalgamations, which I think would be shown in the middle priority as well. And you'll see that's at like a 76%. Sometimes we get told somebody's left one job and they come under frozen, but then within a month or two they're back working for the council, so then we want to join their parts together. So part of the training for the team is to not only look at the frozen area, but to also look at the amalgamations. Likewise, we've completed training in April for additional staff on the transfers in and out, the interfund transfers in and out as well, to raise those up. So I would hope to see those go back in, going towards the numbers in the next once training has been completed. Whilst the training is undertaken, we do expect the staff to be slightly slower, but what we are also doing is checking all the information that they are sort of calculating to a higher degree than we would do once they're signed off. So the cases generally do take longer during this training period. But yes, we're having a meeting every month about where we are with that type of case. So very much on our radar.
Thank you. And I see there's a very slight uptick for the last month, so it will be good to pick this up at the next meeting. The other point I wanted to pick up is something that I think we'll probably pick up as part of the review of risk as well. And you mentioned the cybersecurity reports, and there's the brief summary in your paper on page 39 of the pack. It feels very administrative in the descriptions of the actions taken. I think this is an area of significant risk for all of us. We've all seen the really high profile cases of late, and not just for private companies, but we've seen it recently with the NHS, we've seen it with the Ministry of Defence, and we've seen it with banking institutions. I think all of this data and the risk of cyber attack is significant. I would certainly appreciate having some greater understanding of just how robust the cyber resilience in terms of defence and recovery from cyber attack is for pension records, because I think the update, whilst it's a reasonable summary, it looks quite bland in the coverage. I'd like to understand what that means in terms of just the level of protection that we think the systems have got.
That's fine. The OLTES system that we use, Hayward's, is at the highest ISO level for the security settings it can have. But I know Rachel has been very much involved in the last month at looking at the cyber security and the level of protection for our members as we move towards like member self-service, a newer version, and they're looking at having some having sort of, it's still on a website rather than an app, but it wants like identification, so like facial recognition being used, which she's heavily looking at the cybersecurity side of that to make sure that we don't put any additional risk to the data, and also what the insurance levels are if there were a risk, how we would and manage it. And if any payments were needed, what we would need to do as well. Okay, but I'll get Rachel on that.
Okay, thank you. That report is also to note, so if there are no further questions, we'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the business plan update. Anton? Very pleased there are no unusual items planned, but I thought it was me. I thought I displayed the paper.
No, that is entirely,
Okay, well, that's fine. We'll catch up with ourselves as we move forward. Okay, committee members, I'm not seeing anybody online asking any questions.
sorry,
Sorry.
just going to quickly pick up a few things. I mean, obviously, everything's gone quiet from government.
Yes.
We still are going to respond to the minister's letter, but I'll come to that under the later agenda item.
Yes.
I should also point out that I did say that we would have a training session on the investment strategy statement. I was kept thinking I must get round to that, and then the Prime Minister stood in front of the lectern on a wet morning or afternoon, and I presumed that councillors wouldn't be particularly keen for extra meetings, probably this side of sort of summer, effectively. I'm happy to squeeze in a first training session on investment strategy statement, but it's entirely at your discretion because it's your time that I need.
I think from my point of view, I think doing it after the summer is probably the better use of everyone's time.
I will probably get better attendance and more attentiveness.
I think that's absolutely opposite. Yeah, I think that's
Okay.
So I think we would prefer that to be the other side of the summer.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's fully understood.
Okay, thank you.
I didn't have anything else to add.
Okay. Any questions for Anton on this? Can't see anybody online. So Debbie, have we got anybody raising their hands online? No. Okay. In that case, that's again is to consider and report. We've done that. So we're going to move on to agenda item 9, which is the finance and membership statistics. It's the update. It's pages 51 and 52.
Yes.
And it's Anton again.
Yes, and this will be quite brief. You'll note that there wasn't a financial position provided.
Yeah.
At this time of year, we always want to provide you with the final, what will appear in the accounts. We're not quite there yet, possibly because we're still grappling to get used to Microsoft Dynamics. We are relatively confident that all the information is in the system. We are relatively confident that we will meet being able to provide a set of accounts to the external auditors at the end of the month, but I'm not in the position to provide a set of data now. Obviously, that full year position will be in the accounts, and the accounts will be in front of committee as part of the annual report in September. So I will cover it then. And I'm hoping that now we've sort of getting used to Dynamics and have got rid of some of the teething issues, as we roll through the 24-25 financial year, we will be back to quarterly reports on the finances. Obviously, the member statistics are in the document. As I say, we tend to look at these more as a sort of trends over time than a specific quarter. I dare say, as Somerset Council moves through its restructuring and everything, and I think it's in the public domain. There will be a significant level of job losses, we'll call them, or job reductions through that process. It's possible we'll notice that in the statistics as we get through the year. But it's not something that overly concerns me in terms of short-term impacts. Happy to take any questions.
Fine, only one question from me, and that's, I noticed your slight hesitation about getting the figures ready for the end of this month. So I just want to make sure that we are comfortable with that position.
So all the work that's not done by my team is complete. My team members that need to do bits assure me that we will have it complete by the end of the month. I have no reason to doubt them at this stage. Yeah, and there's it's not necessarily a sort of an on-off tap.
No.
So most of if the auditors start on the 1st of July, and my understanding is they are not actually going to start on the 1st of July, we would have sufficient to provide them such that they could start work even if we hadn't 100% finished the account.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
as I say, all of the external information we need is in. We just need to get the crowbar out and sort of ram it into Dynamics in a way that works.
Yes, or read the instruction manual. Yeah. Okay. Questions from anybody, members? I haven't.
Yes, Chairman, I'm presuming that as soon as there is an assured set of numbers, you'll be letting the committee members know directly when that actually, when we do pass the threshold.
Yes, if there was in any way something I would decree a car crash, I would email and let you know straight away. If it's of a more minor nature, I will wait until the September meeting. But
Yes, Chairman, I'm just conscious that, we're not changing the numbers. There is nothing this committee does which affects the numbers. Our task is to make sure the numbers are produced. And so
correct.
That's what we're looking for, and that can be dealt with outside of committee to give assurance to members of the committee.
I have no doubt we will be informed if there's anything that we.
And as I say, I am confident that they will be done by the end of the month, and then, the audit process will work through. And although obviously, as in previous years, the auditor, although they will give me an interim result, they will not formally sign off the pension fund accounts until they sign off Somerset Council's accounts. My understanding is that will be quite late in the year.
We've at audit recently. We were told very clearly that the reports would not, all the work would not be completed for the theoretical deadline the government has set, because it's just not possible.
The theoretical government deadline was the 31st of May. I can guarantee it wasn't done by that time.
Absolutely.
And from my point of view, that was quite nice, because that's the only deadline the pension fund really has, is to help Somerset Council complete its accounts by that date.
Yeah.
And on the basis they weren't going to meet that anyway, I didn't have to rush to try and meet it as well.
Indeed. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, any other queries or questions? No, in that case, we're going to note that and then move on to agenda item 10, which is a review of the pension fund risk register. So Anton, that's back to your good self.
Yes, as noted in the report, following a discussion at the board meeting in April, and at their request, there is an increase in the likelihood score for the risk regarding staff resilience. And so that is the only change to the risk register. As I have done at previous meetings, I would like to take the fifth on that particular risk until the structure for finance is until I've been made aware of what that is, let alone you. And I'm told that that will be in July. I've been told other dates in the past that haven't materialised. And so hopefully I will be able to tell you what the status quo is in September for you to then take a view should you wish to.
Yes, I think that we cannot even consider taking a view until we know, until we've taken that next step and we know.
Until we know what is
until we know what's
proposed.
Proposed, yeah, precisely. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, any,
And my understanding is that's Nicola has basically completed her view of what she would like, and
I
that is now
understand,
with the
yeah.
design authority.
I understand that the work from officers has been submitted and is now just a question of the minutiae and finalising the paperwork. So we're not in a position to do anything about that until we know what it is. So when they do that, we will know. Peter.
Yes, just turning to the risk register, there were three which I wanted to just air views, shall we say. One of them, the risk of regulatory change, is an external factor which we've got in the risk, and we have no way of mitigating that. It is people above us. So I'm just wondering if we should actually just treat that as rather than a risk. It's an issue. You know, it's an externality. I know why we put that in. It was a reaction to the mini budget, among other things. You know, it was the world.
It's actually been in
had
there a
changed.
longer than that, because it actually predates when we were asked who. That's when it came in, and as I think I would say, if you look at that risk, it does say it's a risk because of us implementing it, rather than that we can control what it is. Sorry, I did slightly butt it.
Yeah, sorry. You just hit the nail on the head. What I was going to say is the risk of regulatory change, the mitigation we have is a flexibility to actually react to change, and the risk is that we wouldn't have sufficient. And I think that is something we could actually rewrite that line with a degree of mitigation in there, showing that we're making sure that we have contingency plans to swing in and make change. We've had, you know, McLeod's a lovely example. You know, it's this is managed this way, and this is what we do to make sure we can manage it this way. So that was the first one which I had picked up on. The second one which we sort of don't affect is the pension fund having insufficient available assets to meet its long-term liabilities. I'm pretty certain that where we're going wrong there is actually the left-hand column. The unmitigated risk is not showing the real world. You know, we work hard to make sure it has got sufficient funds, and end up with the outcome in the on the right-hand side after that mitigation. I was just, you know, scratching my head a bit. It seems a little odd that we would have no impacts on the risk of the pension fund not having sufficient funds to meet long-term liabilities.
So we do have the ability to do what we can, as it were, and that's around process more than anything. So it's around the process of having triannual valuations, and
Next year,
which is next year,
next year.
and it seems to come around immeasurably quickly.
3 years is shorter than you think.
It is. It's I think, and it's a strange one, because it's on, in some ways it's on the risk register, because it's the entire reason we're here. To make sure that ultimately everything else is noise. We're here to make sure that pensions are paid as they fall due, not just for the next year, but for the next 25 years. And at least in my point of view, preferably, depending how long I live, maybe the next 40 years. So, but in terms of and as I say, there is a process around valuations, funding strategy statements, investment strategy statements that all sort of try to mitigate that risk and make it more predictable, but it is inherently risky, and there is an element of it we cannot and will never be able to control. And it's awkward in that sense. But it is right, even if we can't control it, that it's on the risk register, because it is the risk.
The risk, yes.
Yes, Chairman, I agree. My issue is with the left-hand score, because effectively we've got an awful lot of process, an awful lot of intervention to mitigate the risk, as has just been explained. We have many well-embedded processes. If that's what we've done to mitigate, so I'm quite happy that the right-hand column is a post-mitigation score that reflects our current assessment of the world. The left-hand one should be the unmitigated risk, and it should be different, and it should be, it just seems to me.
I suppose, so where we are with that is that the right-hand risk, I think, is definitely correct as it's scored, because even if we were 110% funded at a given point, that doesn't guarantee that we'll be 110% funded in perpetuity.
No.
So you've always got the risk that you'll backslide, and therefore the scoring of the current risk, I mean, my view is that we are sufficiently close to 100% in the mid-90s that the risk is broadly in line with the long-term risk rather than worse. And prior to the 22 valuation, when we were, I think, 87% funded, the likelihood score was higher and the risk was scored greater.
Yeah.
So that's why it's scored broadly, and it's scored in line with the long term, because within the margins of error of life and everything, I considered 95% to be close enough that we were effectively at the long term risk rather than a higher level. As ever, it's your risk register as much as anyone's. If you want it to be a different score, I'm quite happy to represent that.
From my point of view, I think we've got the risk scoring about right. I think it's reasonable that we are there. We're not in a position, for example, where fund members are asking for refunds.
Employers,
employers are asking for refunds,
And
and quite right too, that they're not, because we're not there, and the likelihood of becoming 110% and maintaining 110% in perpetuity is nil. So we have to be conscious of the risk without ignoring it, without being
so
overcautious.
to be clear, that 95-ish or whatever the number is in the previous paper, I think it's 92 at the moment actually, is for the whole fund.
Yeah.
Actually, at the valuation itself, we get a value for every single employer. There are no employers that are getting refunds, but there are employers that are sufficiently well funded that they are not currently paying in, particularly those where they are very well funded and they are an admitted body with a contract end date.
Yes.
So the actuary has said, well, they're due to leave in 3 years' time, and they've got more than enough assets in such that we think they will be fully funded in 3 years' time, let alone today. So, but no one ever gets refunds except for exit credits when they leave, which is a reckoning point for an authority. Now, obviously, Somerset Council as the main employer and a perpetuity employer until someone changes the rules, I would always encourage them to continue to pay it.
Yes.
And by definition, as the largest employer making up over half of the fund, they are not 100% funded currently.
Quite.
Thanks, Chair. a few points. One is almost more curiosity than anything. The risk of governance 3, accounts audit, is green. And I was just a little bit surprised given the position of public sector audits at the moment anyway, in that there's a real shortage of audit staff to the extent that there's now a proposal, which I think is likely to get taken up, that actually a load of audits aren't actually carried out because of insufficient resource. And a huge number of public sector bodies are massively behind in their audits, whether that's police or local authorities. You know, they haven't had a completed audit for the last year or two. I was just surprised to see that level of confidence and green. I didn't know if there was any specific background to that.
I suppose that as much as anything reflects our particular experience rather than the wider environment. So to date, Somerset County Council has always completed its audits within the financial year. My understanding, I can't remember where we are because it's not my specific responsibility, but I think South Somerset is the only one of the districts that is still outstanding. And that is very close. It was supposed to go to the last audit committee and just missed.
Yeah.
So we don't have a legacy issue particularly in Somerset. I can't comment on where we'll be in a year's time, but currently. And also, I've not experienced on the pension fund audit particular resourcing issues from Grant Thornton. In doing the audit is nearly always done in June or July. The audit has always been substantially finished well before I present the annual report to committee in September. So in that context, and similarly, I'm going to grab some Formica for all I'm worth. We've never got close to audit having any particularly substantial findings on the pension fund accounts. And so in that context, it all feels fine. And that's why it's green.
Thanks for that. We'll wait and see. The next one I was curious about was the climate change one, which is number 3 on the first page, I think, is it? I just wonder about the risk of our policy being influenced by future demonstrations. That the trend in the world now seems to be that if I don't like the colour of my local football team scarves, I'm going to go to my local museum and paint on the artifacts there to protest. We've got the potential for the ESG policy to adversely affect us as green, and I wouldn't mind a few words just about your level of confidence there. I appreciate that the main mitigation is where the Brunel Fund is.
So in terms of managing the actual risk rather than the external perception or discussion of the risk, I'm quite comfortable. So we have targets in our investment strategy statement, and I think those targets are broadly realistic and broadly achievable in the context that they are looking 16, 20 years ahead. And obviously there is a level of uncertainty, but we are making progress towards those that feels broadly in line with it. So in terms of managing the actual risk and the financial impact on our investments, I am relatively comfortable. I mean, it's an interesting question you raise around how susceptible we might be to protest pressure, because actually what's in the policy is your decision. I can assure you I won't be swayed by it, but that's neither here nor there. Ultimately, you set the targets in the investment strategy statement, and so I sort of throw that back to you. It's for you to decide whether you wish to be swayed by the rise in public opinion or given specific items. And your address isn't in the public domain.
Yeah. Domain in the same way that some of my colleagues.
I think it's an unfair question, but I wanted to air the point that I don't
Yes.
think we're immune, but
And
let's not
yeah,
delay.
As I don't know whether you're actually aware, but County Hall has been daubed with red paint. Is it
Yeah.
3 times now?
Yeah, and I am very glad that I'm not a Somerset taxpayer putting my tens of thousands into that cleaning work. Thank you. Sorry, Chair. Just had one final point, which is on point 6 and 7, and it is around the cyber. And I just wonder, in the current context, how we assure ourselves of our cyber security. I think if you turned the clock back to when we were all a bit younger, our main reassurance was we all thought no one was interested in us because we were public sector and we had no global presence, etc. But when you look at who has been targeted and why, it's significant. And I just wonder how, as a committee, we do reassure ourselves that we're not going to end up like the blood bank in London.
So, Chairman, I share the concerns that the committee ought to really. We have a number of different areas of risk. We probably ought to do a little more of a deep dive as a committee to understand what is being done to assure that we are not facing risks. I'm particularly concerned that there seem to be 3 trends at the moment. We have clearly thought about the functions that are involved in management of pensions, management of pension funds, and the defence of specific hardware. But we've seen more recent attacks which are just disruptive. They're very deliberately disruptive, and also criminal theft of data type attacks. And I'm not convinced that the resilience risk covers the defensibility risk. We're a pension fund, we hold lots of sensitive information, and we need to really just be assured that there is a framework. We don't need to get into this as a committee. What we need to do is know that it's being covered. How? And I'm just thinking that is a little deep dive-ish to me.
And maybe to add a little assurance to this at the pensions conference this week. This was discussed particularly in line with the pensions dashboard, which everybody is pushing hard for us to complete, and the risks of a member of any of the LGPS pension funds having their dashboard and then being targeted by scammers to try and persuade them to transfer their complete pot from point A to point B, and point B being a hacker's personal bank account. It was being treated incredibly seriously, and the level of security that was being looked at was getting down to quite possibly having biometric criteria. Otherwise, you can't access it. And this, of course, it would be an unmitigated disaster for somebody to lose their complete pension fund, because once it's gone off into the ether, that's it, it's gone, and these people seemingly don't exist. So the question of how you secure each individual member's security of their pension pot was a very serious piece of work that's being done by each and every one of the various pots. So I was very pleased to be able to report that, and I think it is something that we should keep on the radar, because man made it, man can unmake it. As we have very clever people working for us, and so do the ne'er-do-wells. They have very clever people working as well.
And I will respond briefly, but obviously, if this is something the committee want to go into in more detail, we can deal with that. And I'm going to split it into some sections. So the first section is the data and information that I'm responsible for around the investments and finances. I, broadly speaking, don't have any data that is not releasable under FOI. And so in that context, for it to get into the public domain via a cybersecurity breach is not an issue because anyone can just email us and request it. I absolutely get your question around disruption. And yeah, that is something we have to deal with. But ultimately, from my side, the protection comes from Somerset Council's cybersecurity. And if you want me to arrange for someone from the Somerset Council cybersecurity to come and do a presentation to Pensions Committee, I will happily do that. They gave one to the senior leadership team briefing that I attended a couple of months ago. It was very interesting. Apparently we do get sort of attacked hundreds of times a day. So that's one side. Obviously, the membership data is highly sensitive. That sits with Peninsula Pensions, Devon Security, and also the security provided by Haywoods, who provide the database. There is that bit in the admin reports that they've provided. If you want a session in more depth, Peninsula have said they can provide that, but it will have to be a confidential session for obvious reasons.
I think it's something that we should consider. And I think it's something that I would be inclined to ask that we have that confidential session. And it might be that the best way to do that is to have a separate standalone meeting where we have the security from Peninsula
we can actually set it up as as an informal meeting, so therefore
yes.
by definition we don't have to exclude the public or the press because it's not a formal meeting of the committee and therefore it doesn't apply the same rules.
If that's the appropriate way forward, then yes, because I think we would all welcome the conversation and welcome the increase of our own knowledge about what we're doing about security. So I think that's something that I would like to ask for. And I'm assuming everybody's reasonably comfortable with that. Peter?
Yes, Chairman, that definitely scratches my itch. It's the ability to administer the payments, pensions, and so on, and the data that's necessarily held in order to deliver that function. That I think are the two key areas of that I want to show that we have. We've been and double checked down there, and I'm also conscious because of the way that we have things arranged with Peninsula. There are probably other stakeholders who have similar needs, and we probably ought to be having a Peninsula-centric session around that, which would necessarily, as you say, be confidential. And I'd be particularly interested to, when we're doing that, have a look at any external accreditation or stress testing that they take part in. I'm aware that various organisations, get
I know
cybersecurity government agencies come in and provide them with the option of being attacked. Let's see if we can crack it.
I believe Haywoods do that because ultimately, again, there's entry risk problems, but the actual data is hosted by Haywoods on their servers. So that's the actual site, as it were. As I say, there's a route into that via Devon's IT perhaps, but the main risk is with Hayward's itself, and they do undertake that. I'm just going to look at Paul slightly. In arranging that, bearing in mind that Peninsula provide Avon and Somerset Police's pensions resource, membership resource as well, would you like to liaise internally and decide whether actually some more people from the police would like to be in on that meeting? It might be sort of sensible in terms of sort of efficiency all round.
They would be most welcome.
I had made a note to speak to our director of IT just about this. I think Peter's right. I mean, I think the self-service element, people are well geared for closing that down. I think the risks are the malicious denial of service and having no access, and also the loss of personal data. And if we haven't sufficiently assured ourselves, then we're going to get the ICO fine as much as anyone else. So I just think this is such a real risk. We're obligated to do a bit of work to make sure we're happy. So I really welcome your offer, Chair.
And obviously board raised this at their last meeting, and we'll have a discussion next week, but it sounds like collectively we just need to get everyone in one room at one point in time and sort of have a good session.
If we could set that up, that would be the thing. And Paul, if you could convey our open invitation to your colleagues at Avon and Somerset, they would be more than welcome. You know, we would welcome them there. Peter.
Yes, Chairman, could we also, and you know, I think the direction of the main concern is quite clear, but could we also have a look at the physical resilience side of the Peninsula business as well, the business continuity? I'm conscious that you might well have, you know, a physical inability to get to your server room, for example. You know, gas leaks and so on happen. We should be looking at the resilience of the system, not the resilience of just the cyber elements associated with the servers. We should be looking at whether the service that the servers provide has been adequately safeguarded in physical ways as well. And it's still around this theme of we need to move money, and we need to move money reliably. It's a little like, you know, the old pay computers of the army were the absolutely best defended part of the army, because if you don't pay the army, it doesn't. It gets quite grumpy quite quickly.
Yeah, happy to try and include that. I mean, it may be that ends up being a separate sort of bit, depending how the individuals involved mesh and everything. But we can address all of these in a period of time.
If I could just try and encapsulate it, it's the systems approach. You know, you've got hardware, you've got operating systems, you've got applications, you've got data, and you've got connectivity. And actually, we're just interested in paying money, and we need all of those bits to be in harmony. You know, the
actually
needs to be patched, etc. You know,
in the current world, I'm assuming Peninsula are very much like us. As I say, I know that the Hayward's database itself is externally hosted. My understanding is the vast majority of Somerset Council's servers and everything are now externally hosted. They do still have a couple of machines at County Hall. I'm connected to one of them because there's one thing that I use that doesn't work remote servers. So actually, with a lot of this, you're actually into contractual responsibilities. You've outsourced your servers to whomever. Let's say it's Microsoft, just for argument. Actually, it's Microsoft's responsibility to put in place the security around that. It's Microsoft's responsibility under the contract to make sure there is continuity of service to you, and there'll be provisions in the contract for what happens if there's not continuity of service. So yeah, it's not my area. I can get whoever within Somerset Council and Devon Council are responsible in, but I suspect the answers will be, we've outsourced this and here's the piece of paper that says they guarantee it. But that's the way the world is at the moment.
Okay, any other queries or questions before we move on? No, in that case, we're going to move on to agenda item 11, which is the administration strategy statement, which is Anton again.
Yes, so this is a bit of a to and froing. The statement came before you at your last meeting. You provisionally agreed it subject to the agreement of the board at the board's meeting. That was not forthcoming. And so therefore I didn't use the provision that was agreed at the last meeting that the chair could sign it off on confirmation from the board. We went through a process with board members and Peninsula to sort of discuss where the issues were and how to resolve those. That led to Peninsula adding additional language around how the process of charging penalty fees would be administered, making it clear that it is a last resort, not a first resort, and that there would be dialogue with an employer of sufficient and significant level before any fees were charged. The board, and specifically one of the board members that was specifically keen on questioning this was Rachel Ellens, who is the payroll manager for Somerset Council. So she was very much seeing it with her user employer hat on. We've reached a point where she is happy, and I haven't had any other representations from board. So I now bring it back to you for formal approval. And if you've got any tricky questions, I will need to throw it over to Shirley. I'm sort of, it's my name on the report as much as just to introduce it. But if you have technical questions about the strategy itself.
Do we have questions or content at this stage? Peter?
I'm content to propose adoption.
Propose adoption, seconded. Yep, Spiker Beeb, thank you. All those in favour, that's it. There we are.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Right, moving on to item 12 on our item 12 on our agenda, which is communication strategy statement.
Yes, so the communication strategy is a requirement of the regulations. We've had one in place for a number of years. It's probably fair to say it hasn't been revised for most of those years. And so now it's coming back before you. What I've provided is very much a first draft. It's absolutely not for approval today. It's for thoughts and comments. I will then have a similar session with board next week.
Yeah.
I will then circulate it to employers, assuming both committee and board are happy it's in sufficient state to be circulated to employers. I will then circulate it to employers over the summer, and we will reconvene in September to discuss it again, and if appropriate at that point adopt. If not appropriate, we'll move forward as agreed at that point. I will also point out that I did share with you a email from Councillor Dunk. I would point out that I think that's more about implementation than the strategy per se. You will note that I have included in the strategy a provision for a regular newsletter to members. Yeah. But I wouldn't usually expect in a strategy to talk about the detailed contents of such. And indeed, actually, that, although it's perfectly within the remit of the committee, I wouldn't usually sort of discuss implementation to that level, but
From a personal point of view, I welcome the examples that were provided by Councillor Dunk. I think it's a very good thing, and I think they would be welcomed by most of the members of the pension scheme. And I think that we should adopt a relatively similar format. Obviously, the minutiae of that is down to others, but I think there's a good case for it, and I think it's a reasonable thing for us to do.
I should also, I should also point out that intentionally, this strategy is very similar to the Devon equivalent.
Yes. Yes.
And specifically where it refers to things that Peninsula will do, that's entirely intentional. It also made it a lot easier for me to draft by starting with the Devon one and moving from there.
Yeah, I don't really need to, reinvent the wheel here. I think there's plenty of good practice out there for us to emulate. Peter.
Yes, I was just going to say my usual two strands of concern are making sure you have a flexible range of communications, which this strategy does. So sometimes it's paper, sometimes it's in with your payslip, sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's a website. But the point is, you need to be able to re-engage people with the process if they have failed to be communicated with. You need to redirect them back into that. And there is always an ever-decreasing tail of people who don't do electronics, so they won't do. They'll opt out of email, this sort of thing. And equally, there are also people like myself who just get so much it's noise. So having a broad range, which this does, gets around that. It makes sure we don't accidentally fail to communicate relevant things to people. Yeah, it seems to be communicating to and from the right counterparty, shall we say? The employers are in there. I think it's good.
But from my point of view, I absolutely understand the need for the communication, and you're quite right, Peter. It's imperative that we make sure everybody can access the information in the way that they need to access it. Now, that might be a diminishing number, but there are still a large number of our members who are not as computer literate as their children or grandchildren would wish them to be. And therefore, the way they access that information, it needs to work for them. It also needs to be secure, etc. And we need to be able to make sure that they understand the changes. I mean, I know that my own IT skills are somewhat lacking. I still get irritated when my daughter does that. So it's as simple as that, Dad, which was not much help because it was about 35 movements all blurred into one. But that says more about me than anybody else. So I do understand, and I think it's really important that we make sure that everybody can access it in a method that suits them and that they understand what it is they're doing as they do that. I mean, this access to the pensions dashboard that everyone's talking about is a hugely important piece of work. So there we are. That's my rant over. Habib.
Yeah, just I totally agree with Peter here. The other thing is, I think, in my view, the strategy is one thing, and implementation is something different. And in light of what's happening with our finances shrinking, we need to sort of ensure that this actually has a safe place, that we communicate with people on a regular basis and respond to them, because some of the things that I'm hearing on the doorsteps, as you might know, there's an election on the horizon, and is people not responding to emails and communicating properly. And we get an earful for that,
Yeah, just to remind you on the finance side that the finances of the fund are completely separate from the council, and therefore ultimately we can dedicate whatever resources this committee deems necessary to communication.
Yeah.
So it's not a question that, you know, the finances of the council are in trouble. Now, there is a knock-on effect. You know, if we spent £30 million on communications, that would filter down into employer contributions, and that probably wouldn't be seen as good value by them. But I don't think we're talking about anything like that sort of sums. So it is at your behest to decide how much resource to give to it.
I think the adequate amount of resource is the amount of resource that we need to allocate to that. And as you say, we're not going to be talking about fortunes that affect the fund. But I think it's important. I'm reassured that we are separate, as we should. So we should be. Habib.
I mentioned that because later on in the report, there's a letter from the minister to say that look for efficiency saving. So, and I just didn't want the communication to be a victim of this. That's all.
At the end of the day, the minister can ask for what they want to ask for, and then until they put that in regulations and stop us, it is at your behest.
I think local government
And
financing is a completely separate issue. And I don't doubt that the moment a new government is formed, when local government goes to it and says we need to be better funded, the instant response will be we need to make better use of the money you've got. So I suspect that they will be suggesting collaboration as a first move before they start talking about increasing the funding regime. But perhaps that's just me. Okay, so any other comments on item 12 on our agenda, the communications policy statement? I'm not seeing any. Debbie, you will shout at me to somebody online, won't you? Okay.
I'm not picking any specific additional
I don't think there is
inclusions or anything within it that specifically you
No.
wish removed.
anything.
So
No.
I will move forward
I
with
think-
further consultation with a view to it coming back to
Come
you
back
at
in
the meeting. Yeah.
Hopefully at our next meeting. Okay. If we can try and make that happen. Okay. Moving on then to item 13, which is the response to the minister's letter of the 15th of May. Anton.
So obviously, the letter is included as an appendix in full. And I have taken the liberty of drafting a response as requested by the minister. It is our understanding from the Scheme Advisory Board and civil servants that irrespective of who the minister may or may not be by the deadline, which I think was the 17th of July, that we are very much encouraged to still respond to the letter. And therefore, I would encourage the committee to agree to something, even if it's not what I've drafted, in sufficient time that we can then send that off.
Okay. I thought it was a very, very good comprehensive response to the minister. And I would be happy to put my name to that. I'm more than happy to listen to other suggestions. Peter.
I think you pulled your punches on the very last line. The idea of a further reorganisation to further consolidate funds is just mad. You do these things. They have a huge transactional cost and friction, and we are happy that we are already pretty much optimal. It's like swapping a V12 Ferrari for a V10 Ferrari. We're good. We don't need to go. We're not going to get much benefit, and unimposed change is just daft. So to say would not be optimal is I think understating it somewhat. But I'm content that this is a polite letter to a minister.
And as with many government consultations I've taken part in the past, irrespective of the colour of the government that comes in, I fully expect them to completely ignore it and do what they wish anyway. But yeah, that is the nature of consultations in my experience. Perhaps that's because I'm a cynic that's at the wrong end of a particular sort of argument.
You're just a realist.
Chairman, I mean, I have to say honestly, I think it would be damaging and would not represent best value for money is the sort of language I would expect to be giving the senior Treasury official who will ultimately decide whether or not this policy has the Treasury behind it. It's clear in my view, it would be extremely difficult to demonstrate value for money from such a change for this fund.
Okay, is it your wish that that we send this letter as is, or do you want to do some further drafting on it? I was content, but I'm happy to listen to what others.
Mr. Chairman, I just, I feel a further round of expensive consolidation would be damaging and would not represent good value for money. That would be what I would put as the closing line. So members, at the end of paragraph 2B, bottom line. I think, don't pull your punches. It's not wise.
I shall listen back to the recording in a week's time and represent what you've said. I will also take soundings from the board. If they come up with something significant, I will come back to you by email, but I suspect.
The last line in the letter as drafted for SCPF, we have yet to cover the cost of our transaction to Brunel through the fee savings and feel a further round of expensive consolidation would not be optimal at this stage. I think, yes, we can beef that up, but you have already expressed it. I do not see that a further consolidation would be helpful or value for money, frankly.
Certainly support Peter's suggested rewording. I think we've just unfortunately erred on slightly too polite, I think, which is.
Chairman, if I could just indulge, I am actually saying two things there. It'd be damaging in as much as we would have to write off further recovery of our current consolidation, because clearly that's gone. So that is actually telling the money man who's signing this off for the minister that is an act of damage to a pension fund, removing money that would otherwise be available to the fund. And separately, you're talking to the Treasury rules about value for money. There would not be a decent investment case because the costs of transaction are unlikely to be recovered on a fund that's already largely consolidated. So that's specific Treasury rule stuff straight from straight from the book, and you're talking the right language to just say no. You can't. Not only are we not liking this, it's not just not optimal, it's actually harmful. It's harmful and difficult to justify.
One of the things I always struggle with is I think all political parties admit that there are problems in Britain at the moment and problems that need addressing. And yeah, this isn't one of them. Why is anyone taking parliamentary thought and time away from really serious things that need fixing? But we are where we are, and yeah, it's as I say, I've been through this on a couple of rounds now. We effectively, when we pre-pooling, it started with a consultation like this, at which we said, look, there's no value for money in this. And we are where we are now, 10 years later.
I do wonder whether it's new people coming into departments and deciding that they need to rearrange the chairs to show that they've done something. Okay, any further comments on item 13? In that case, we're going to go back to item 5, which we didn't take at the time, and that's the. Yeah, I think Anton, that's you.
Well, I'm quite happy to take any questions on economics or with respect to Caroline's document that I circulated earlier in the week, but
Queries, questions, comments? Peter?
Not really. I mean, having read the report, it was brief, and I thought there weren't the usual insights as to opportunities being explained to us, but I was content with the report.
I think it does to a certain extent come back to what I said earlier, both economically and politically. We are at a point of significant uncertainty.
Yeah.
That I think, because I read something somewhere, I mean, we're moving through them quite rapidly, but I think it's something like 60% of the population of the globe have elections this year. You know, we've had a result in India, which I think surprised many, not least Prime Minister Modi, in that ended up in broadly a hung parliament. We've had a result in South Africa, which is a hung parliament, absolutely, and I don't think that's anywhere close. I don't follow South Africa that closely, although having worked from a South African firm for a couple of years, I have a sort of more passing interest than some, I suspect, but I don't believe they've actually reached a conclusion as to what that coalition might look like, let alone how it will then behave. So, and as I said, with elections, well, all of Europe having had European parliamentary elections in the last week.
Big changes therein.
Yes. And it's always interesting, I think, as to whether populations sort of look at European parliamentary ones as a place where they can make a protest without it actually impacting quite as much. We've certainly seen in the UK in the past much higher voting patterns for the Brexit Party reform or their ilk in European elections than perhaps in general elections in the UK, although that may not be the case in the next month, who knows. So yeah, that political uncertainty is just unbelievable this year, really. And some of that slightly depends on some of the results. I think ahead of our UK elections, I am allowed to say nasty things about Trump if I were, and the idea of him being re-elected does somewhat scare me.
I don't think you're alone. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, item 14 on our agenda, which is any other business of urgency. I've not been notified of anything. Is there anything you would like to bring to the conversation? Debbie, do we have any? No, nothing online either. In that case, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance this morning and your questions. As ever, I will make sure Anton is continues to make himself available for queries, questions, or follow-ups in the normal manner. Nothing has changed. I don't think it will change anytime soon.
No, always email me and I'll do my best.
Always there to assist us. We've got a couple of things that will be pending and going over to the next meeting, which is September. I think the next one's in September.
Yes, I think it's the 14th or so of September.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the date in my diary. So subject to that, I'd like to thank you and wish you all a very good weekend.
13th.
13th, right, so 13th.
Friday the 13th. What can possibly go wrong?
Oh, yes. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to formally close the meeting. Thank you.